Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm here today with JR Ross, who's the Vice President of Marketing for PosiGen. Welcome, JR.
Hey, good morning. Good to see you, Joe.
Good to see you. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I, I, so PosiGen is an interesting company. I know you've been there for a little over a year now, but I wonder if you could just tell us more about the company to kick things off.
Yeah, so I joined PosiGen about 13 months ago. I'm the first head of marketing that they've had. We are a national growth stage residential solar company, but we focus on underserved communities, and these would be communities of low and moderate income homeowners, people who haven't been able to afford solar in the past to save money on their energy costs and do right by the planet. We have about 25,000 customers in 6 different states. We've grown to over 600 employees, and we have digital double-digit growth year over year. Our motto, very simply, is solar for all. It's a mission and values driven organization.
I love that. Solar for all, and to your point, if you're focused on some of the underserved communities, it's how can you, democratize solar for everybody. I love that. I love that. So tell us a little bit about your role as head of marketing. What does the marketing organization look like, and what is your focus as the head of marketing?
So we built 3 teams. We've built a brand team within PosiGen. We've built a group of specialists, which tend to be more media oriented. They work, and then we have affiliate marketing and analytics specialists. And then we have a community partnerships team where we have community managers that work at the grassroots level in each of our states. Our biggest opportunity is to build trust with these communities so that they understand our offering and want to take advantage of it.
Awesome. And so, ish, how big is the marketing team on all those 3 teams represent how many people ish?
We have about 15 right now and
Okay.
continue to expand. And then we should talk about sort of what our agency structure is outside the organization.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. So you've had an interesting career journey. I know just before PosiGen, you actually spent almost 9 or a little over 9 years at PepsiCo.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if you could just give us a nickel tour of your career path and how you ended up there.
Yeah, my
Or
marketing career started in New Orleans working with Cox Interactive Media. So anybody who knows digital media, when you hear the word interactive, you know how long ago that was. And that led to working with a series of startups, building a digital practice within a shopper marketing agency in the Northeast. And then when I was recruited to come to PepsiCo, I think what was exciting and why I've come back to this type of role is at each stage, they said, we need somebody who can manage digital innovation within our North American beverage group. And so I did that for a number of years. Then I rotated and had the opportunity to be the chief of staff for 2 different CMOs at PepsiCo within the US. And then most excitingly, I managed 3 global partnerships within our commercial division, within the food service division. And so that really gave me a full perspective of how to build relationships, how to plan, understanding of strategy and consumer insights.
awesome. Chief of staff is also an interesting role within marketing organizations. I'm curious if you could just share a little bit about what that means when you serve as chief of staff for the CMO of PepsiCo. What is that?
You're in the middle of all the connections to the rest of the business. And I learned as a marketer that I didn't understand the rest of the CPG business as well before I became chief of staff. And so being involved in innovation pipelines and product development and all the earliest stages of the business was what I enjoyed doing most, relabeling, over 1,600 new FDA regulations. All of that helped me really learn the business, but I really started to understand people structure and how teams are built.
Mhm. And within a company like PepsiCo, it's obviously a giant organization. It's probably a little different than PosiGen, where you're even with 600 plus people, which is nothing to sneeze at in terms of size. It's a different kind of world than the world of PepsiCo.
It is, but I was really motivated when I met the C-suite here because a lot of them have come from other publicly held solar companies. And so when I told them I knew nothing about solar, they said, that's great. And I was like, are you sure? And they said, yeah, we need someone who's a disciplined marketer who can come in and help us think about all the different parts of the business. So we don't have all the resources in the world, but we can certainly prioritize and plan for what's going to drive growth in the business.
I love that. Okay, so I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you wish that you'd gotten really early in your career, or maybe some advice you'd give to a young marketer that's just starting out in their career.
It's 2 pieces. I think you have to be an insatiable learner. Like you have to want to be a marketer, right? I started out as a content writer in the digital space, but I wanted to understand consumer behavior. And so being a marketer is like, how much more time can I spend with the people that I'm trying to market to? And what do I learn from them? So I think being a learner is number one. Second is you got to go to wherever the customer is and to wherever your employees are and learn directly from them. And so when I started here in the first 60 days, I went to every market and rode along on sales calls. My office, as I look out the window of my office, I sit in the middle of the collections team and the customer care team. And so I can open my door and hear exactly what I need to learn about what's going on with customers and pricing and promotions and where they are on the customer journey.
That's awesome. So you said there was a second piece of advice too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be an active listener, and you have to learn, what you're hearing in the room and think about what the people who are saying things in the room or pitching or selling in the room, what is their motivation and and how are they responding to it? And when you do that, it makes it a lot easier to market and have a conversation with them.
I love it. So I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what your superpower is.
I would go back and say it's being an active listener. And I had jobs in the music industry starting as a teenager, and I also worked in restaurants for a long time. And when you work in a restaurant, you have about 30 seconds to make a good first impression. And so by being an active listener and being a good observer, that allows you to use your personality and your charisma to the best of its impact.
Active listening is definitely an important skill. Also, I heard you talk about early in your career, you were focused on writing. So I'm curious if you feel writing is an important skill for young people who are aspiring marketers.
Yeah, because I think marketers, sometimes they write at the level of what the research they're given, or they write at the level of what they think is going to tell the best story, as opposed to how the audience wants to receive it. And that means that the audience probably has a much shorter attention span than you want them to when you tell them about your great proposition or product.
Makes sense. So I'm curious where you find inspiration, either for yourself or for your team outside of the marketing world.
I think you have to have a healthy sort of personal board of directors, like mentors, or learn from elders, I think is really important too. And a lot of that feeds sort of creativity. And you have to identify those people throughout your career and check in with them or read about them or take an opportunity to meet them. I have no shame in like reaching out to people and asking if I can just talk with them for a few minutes about something. On the technical side, we had a great conversation yesterday about generative AI and what would we use Midjourney for? What would we use Chat GPT for? And the women who work on my brand team talked about, I think we can use this for creative inspiration, right? And so we don't know how we'll use it for the business, or we're not going to talk about how we'll use it in certain parts of the business yet, but we can use those images, we can use the prompts in writing to give us some sort of creative inspiration or to think about things, maybe challenge the team, differently.
I think that the smartest use of AI at this point in our evolution of what AI is to your point, the beginning, help you get started, and then you've got to make it personal and
Sure.
put a human touch onto the AI. And I think that's smart to do it that way. So I'm curious, are there some specific values that you either want to demonstrate to your team, or maybe you would even demand from somebody that would join your team?
I think when you work in a high pressure environment like marketing, where everything you're doing is being questioned, reviewed, subject to a lot of input, a lot of help from above, of course, I think you have to start with empathy. And so you have to have empathy for your coworkers, and you have to have empathy for your customers as well. And if you understand, again, listening, having empathy for them, that allows you to lead with more authenticity. And I think that's how I'm learning to relate, to younger generations when I'm hiring folks who are Gen Z, especially, is telling them exactly who you are, what motivates you, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. And that kind of authenticity helps the team figure out how to work together, even in a hybrid environment too. I have about a third of my employees are not based in our new headquarters here in New Orleans. And so, and then I would say when you go in to meet with others, always have a strong point of view. Having a strong point of view means you're making a case for something, you're taking a stake in the decision making. Even if you're wrong, you can find ways to work the number, you can find ways to have solutions. But if you have a strong point of view, then you've probably done your work and you believe in what you're offering.
I love that. So as you know, setup, we help marketers connect with the best people and resources, and that often means that we connect brands and marketing agencies together, marketers with agency support. So we're not an agency, we are not on the client side, we live in that space in between, and we think a lot about that relationship between brands and agencies. And so I'm curious about just generally, how do you work with marketing agencies today? How have you worked with them in the past?
Yeah, I think so. When we first met, I was trying to figure out what kind of capabilities were needed internally and what kind of capabilities I could source externally, given the short amount of time I had in my job as I started to meet the needs of the business. So I'm looking for external capabilities first on two ends of the spectrum. One, from an insights and planning standpoint, until I get a good foundation and knowledge of my customers, and especially as you look at expansion into new markets, I need external capabilities to help me with that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I think it's, how do I realize creative excellence and execution? And so working with different agencies to try and figure out how we evolve the brand, the biz ID. I mentioned sort of work on brand strategy and pillars of messaging. I think all of that. So it's kind of like at the beginning and then at the end.
Yeah.
For it.
And, well, and I'm curious if there are certain disciplines of marketing that you feel these are core to our identity or our being, and we need to keep these in-house if at all possible. And are there certain other disciplines of marketing where you say, I really like the benefit of outside either perspective or expertise?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. External expertise from a technical perspective and the underpinning of what is our MarTech stack and how we manage it. But it comes with a little bit of a caution in that I've learned from here that technology alone isn't going to solve the problems that we have. We need to be able to have the resources internally to manage, those types of relationships, and certainly to be prepared to scale for it. So I leaned real heavily on expertise around search engine optimization and quite a bit on national PR, and I think those are interchangeable. And then really how we developed a real campaign approach and how we execute those campaigns. I needed to go outside for that, so I could also figure out the internal team dynamics and how we manage it and bring some of the junior members of the team along.
I love that. That's absolutely a great perspective. Okay, so as marketers, we often work with other members of the team, other members of the C-suite who don't live, although everybody sometimes claims to be an expert in marketing, they don't live and breathe marketing every day. And so sometimes they don't understand the full value of marketing. So how do you demonstrate the value of marketing to those who aren't, who don't live and breathe marketing every day?
Yeah, I think I don't fault anyone for being passionate about marketing, right? And so that's part of when you get a lot of help from above. You have people who are really interested in what you're doing as opposed to
help.
Yeah, wanting to tell you what to do. And so I think you have to immediately establish some sort of standardization of metrics. And who are you comparing yourself against? Identify your top competitors, look at some of being a digital marketer background, look at what the trends are or sort of what those thresholds are for expectations and performance, and then figure out, do I need to tell everybody about this weekly? Do I need to inform them monthly? And what are the implications of that? So we do both weekly reports within the team and then monthly reports that go out to all of our internal stakeholders, including the board. And so that helps us figure out and focus on like where we're having an impact in the business. And if we don't have the resources yet, we've got to go in and sell, to get those resources and capabilities internally or externally. The other piece of it is that I've learned in the last year is explaining to those stakeholders how we're spending our time. And so our last monthly report said that, look, 57% of our monthly work comes from internal requests. And so we've got to get better at managing those internal requests, and they need to help us be more efficient so the team's not overly taxed.
I love that. That's really smart because yes, we can do all the things that you're asking for, but there's a priority list. And the question is, do you want us to put that at the very top of the priority list? Because here's the 5 things that might slip if we do that.
Yep.
And that's good to get buy-in. Does your answer change if the marketing that you're trying to accomplish is more brand focused and less directly tied to some kind of an ROI where you're actually, it's one thing when you do marketing activities and you can show sales and results from it. It's another thing when you're just building brand. So does that change at all?
Yeah, my pitch for this role, because we created this role in working with their CEO and founder, Tom Neihart, was I want to sit at the intersection of performance marketing and a healthy brand.
Hmm.
And so I had to figure out, what do I need to do for this brand to be healthy? How am I going to measure that? And then is that going to resulting in building trust in the communities in which we serve? And then from a performance standpoint, how quickly can I figure out what's working and what's not working from a media and affiliate standpoint?
So I'm curious if there's a campaign or a program that you've run either at PosiGen or maybe in a previous life that taught you something hugely valuable because either it was a huge flop and you learned something really important from it, or maybe it was a big success that you would like to emulate again in the future if you could.
Yeah, I think that's the discipline and the way that I was trained at PepsiCo. So two successes, and both were in our water category. It was the launch of the bubbly sparkling water
Mhm.
brand and the launch of Life Water as well. And so when I was as chief of staff, I got to sit in our stage gate and innovation process and help lead those meetings. And so I really understood the value of consumer insights that built both of those brands long before they were launched. Having a commercial plan, knowing who our partners were all amazing. And to see success at, over $100 million sold in the first 10 months was really an amazing process to be a part of. And I was only one of many people who worked on it. When you asked about flops, one thing that came to mind when I worked at Cox Interactive Media, I managed these email programs, and I sent out an email to 150,000 people, and I didn't close the gates that allowed them to reply all. And every single phone, and so people started replying. Every single phone in our office rang at the same time. It was like something out of a movie. And the lesson there was always test before deploying. That was not the situation to be in.
Wow, wow. So there were a few reply alls is what you're saying to that.
The phone rang for about 2.5 days of people complaining about it. And, learned a lot about privacy and opting in, I think, through that lesson.
Okay. I'm gonna ask one more kind of marketing related question, then I'm gonna
Yeah.
jump to some ones for fun. I'm curious if there's a brand that you've never worked on that you really admire, and what is it about that brand that you really admire?
So I'll say one. I never worked on Maker's Mark, but I was a Maker's Mark ambassador for a number
Hmm.
of years, and I got to go to their distillery and get my own personal bottle and that sort of thing. And I don't even know that that's my favorite whiskey, but I talked about that for like years, and let people
That's in
try it.
Kentucky. We went
Yes,
to
in
Kentucky
Kentucky.
for that.
Yep, exactly. And so I was really always fascinated by Ken Samuels, their founder, and their approach to loyalty through their programs. I thought was really powerful. As in being older now, I look to a 13-year-old to give me a lot of guidance and advice about brands that he's passionate about. And he talks a lot about Pit Viper and Liquid Death. And
Yeah.
so he talks about those brands because they never waver in their steadfast commitment to cultural engagement, right? And they're accessible, and he finds them entertaining, and they're just relevant day to day and week to week.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, like Liquid Death is a canned water company. Their premise is really to remove plastic from our environment by having, cans are better for the environment from a circular economy standpoint. So they have canned water, but the branding is obviously Liquid Death, and they're focus on being culturally relevant. I mean, they put a lot of content out in the world, and it's always on point and edgy and that kind of thing.
Yeah, edgy would be an understatement for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so my next question, I'm gonna alter it a little bit because I usually ask, what is a quote or a movie or book or band, but I'm also gonna ask, or a food, or, is there one of those things that really inspire, or a sports team? Is there something that really inspires you, and what is it about that inspires you most?
Yeah, so I'll give you two quotes, and I think the context will explain themselves. My grandfather was a big believer in service as its own reward. And so one of the reasons why I moved back to Louisiana was to be serve on the board for the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. And they restore and recycle, they store, recycle, and redistribute used oyster shells from restaurants all over New Orleans, 15 tons or so per year. And then they're bagged and returned to the Gulf to help restore the wetlands. So oyster is my favorite food. So that's where service is its own reward, and oysters would answer that.
So you're doing your
And
part by eating as many oysters as possible to save the
exactly,
wetlands.
that's right. Every night I'll do the best I can to help with that. And then I think during COVID in the summer of 2020, I was reading about my favorite guitarist, Jerry Garcia, and his quote was, "The situation is the boss."
Huh.
And so that removes a lot of responsibility or accountability that you think when you go into a certain situation, you may not have caused a problem, you may not be aware of what's going on. The situation is the boss, yet you have an opportunity to improve it or have impact with it or to fix it.
I love that. I love that. So I'm curious, outside of your family, where you find joy. Do you have any hobbies or other passions outside of work?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. So I spent a lot of time since I moved back here fishing, kayaking in the wetlands and swamp areas and learning about the coastline, which is similar to where I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. And so I have a lot of passion for that. As you and I have talked about, I previously worked at and still volunteer at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. I'm the Twitter curator each season for Jazz Fest, and that gives me a reason to be there every day, all day for 7 days each year. And then, outside of that, I've always collected folk art, a lot of graffiti and street art and other concert posters, which I've put on pause because I've run out of room for places.
Yeah, the
even
challenge with those of us who love that kind of thing is we don't have wall space for all the things that we really want to display and care about. And you feel like it's such a shame to put them in the closet.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, JR, this has been such a joy. So JR Ross is the Vice President of Marketing for PosiGen. Thank you so much for this time, JR. It's been so fantastic to have the conversation.
This was great, Joe. Thank you. And thank you to your team for this opportunity.